Coming up on this week's show, what does 2025 have in store for the railway? We first take a look back at the big stories of 2024 before looking forward to the year ahead. And an HS2 construction update. Euston station is confirmed at just 6 platforms, but the first tunnel boring machine completes its journey under the capital to Ealing. Welcome to Green Signals from me, Steph Foster, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
And it's us this time rather than you and Nigel.
I know, poor guy. He's got the lurgy.
He has.
Spoke to him over the weekend. He's not right, and he's a Burnley lad, so he's tough, and he doesn't give in easily. But he wasn't right, so hopefully the bug will pass, and he'll be back to full strength soon. But for now, it's us.
I'm just really hoping I didn't give it to him when he came for Christmas dinner, but
it's been a horror actually. My eldest son's had it. For about sort of 10 days now, and he's not been right. So it's definitely not a nice bug going around. So get well soon, Nige.
Yes, we want you back. We want you back. Anyway, so a slightly different style of show for this one, for the first of the new year. We're going to do a quick review of the big stories in 2024, and then we will have a look forward, I suspect, Richard, with a bit of trepidation, perhaps, at what might be coming down the track for 2025.
Yeah, I'm trying to be positive, Steph, but I'm struggling. But anyway, we'll come to that.
Let's give it a go, eh? Let's try not to be too downhearted. Anyway, so the biggest thing that happened, probably not just for railways, but for, the whole of the UK really, was the election and Labour winning on July the 4th. So what do we think for railways? Has it been good? Has it been bad? Have they done what they promised? Obviously, for me, we started this kind of conversation about what a Labour government might mean for the railways back in kind of April time when we got the Getting Britain Moving plan. And it promised to move fast and fix things, and we had a plan for urgent change. Richard, do you think we've seen any of that?
Oh, we've certainly seen some of the things they promised to do.
That's true.
But for me, it's been very political. So, this notion of bringing things back into public ownership, it's fundamentally doctrinal, isn't it? It's an ideological thing, really. It doesn't have any real bearing on whether things work better or don't work better. And we can see that, go and ask the customers of Northern, right?
Well, quite.
So the challenges are the challenges, and they're not really impacted whether they're in the public or private sector. I think the one thing I kind of sign up to is, although 20 years ago I didn't feel there was a philosophical problem with separation of track and train, and we've seen it work in other sectors, such as aviation, but it hasn't worked. So bringing those two together, I think, is sensible. So yeah, they've done some of the things they said they'd do. They said that they would start the process of bringing the train companies back into public ownership. They're doing that.
Yeah,
the legislation's gone through to enable that to happen. But I don't know about you, but the thing that's missing from that document you just talked about, Getting Britain Moving, is that real sense of pace.
Yes,
and I suppose immediate changes to the way we think about performance and management. So if you look at the document Getting Britain Moving that you talked about, it was in two distinct phases. There was a plan for immediate urgent action, and then there was a plan for change, sort of step two. And the step two was going to take longer. But the plan for immediate action was immediate. I was just looking at it. It was day one. It was, we're going to appoint an industrial relations expert to help us with these. If they have, I don't know who it is, and they've kept that one quiet. We're going to create a new leadership team for GB Railways and get with the challenge of getting a fully functioning organisation in place within 6 months. Well, that's now, and it hasn't happened. And they did talk about a partnership model and a collaboration between, the various bits of, Network Rail and directly operated railways, whatever it's called, and the department. But I just sense that we're going to make an immediate change, because I think if they'd done that, if they'd said, right, you are the chief executive of Shadow GBR,
Yes.
whoever you was, the industry would have started to align behind that. But they're hiding behind this, oh, we can't really do anything because we haven't got the legislation yet. I mean, I just don't buy that, you know.
No, especially not when the document said that there were all these things they could do without legislation. And actually, that whole plan for urgent change, the whole point of it was things they could do without legislation and being able to start positive change from day one. So I think you're right. There's nothing that should have stopped them from appointing somebody. No. And I think, as you've kind of alluded to, really, if there are things happening behind the scenes to address some of these things they said they were going to address, then they needed to have made them public. They needed to have said, we are doing this person is in charge of X, and they haven't done that. And so either these things aren't happening or they're not telling us, in which case it leaves everybody not aligned on that same direction of travel.
Totally. I mean, the thing I would have done, so if you play sort of, pretend Secretary of State for a minute, I really would have tried to take the Department for Transport out of the day-to-day immediately. Yeah. Literally immediately. They don't have any safety of the line responsibility. You don't need a departmental official to run a safe railway on a day-to-day basis. So just take them out of it. Literally just take them out. Be brave. Right. From tomorrow, nothing to do with you. Right? Yeah. And it would have been a bit wobbly, probably, for some, because people, what do we do now? But we worked it out pretty quick. And so that I think is that was a missed opportunity, because you can't do it now. But so look, they've done the political stuff, but they've not, I don't think we've noticed any material change.
I think you're right. And actually what you just said there about, it could have been a bit wobbly if they'd made that change, and it might have taken people a bit of time to figure it out. In some ways, I think that's what we need. We almost need somebody to just shake it all up a bit. Yeah. And force people to think differently, to think quickly, to try and come up with new solutions, because I think it's that waiting for the perfect answer that is causing us to do nothing.
Yeah. So. But that's a classic governmental thing. It's a classic sort of civil service thing. Oh, we can't make any mistakes, so we spend forever trying to get 98% accuracy, when actually for some of this stuff, a lot less would have done the job. Anyway. So it'll be very interesting. We'll come on to talk about 2025, won't we?
Indeed. Yeah. But should we have a bit of good news now?
Oh, go on. What was the good news?
Right. So, we had some good news in June for Alstom Derby. Yeah. Alstom was finally awarded the contract for the 10 new Elizabeth line trains that obviously we'd known for ever that they needed. It was an order worth £370 million, and it secured the Litchurch Lane site future for a good number of years. And of course, they've also been awarded a £60 million refurb contract for cross-country Voyagers as well, haven't they? So it's been quite a good year for Derby, really, after a pretty shaky start.
Totally agree. And of course, the other thing that Nick Crossfield, the then managing director, he's now moved on, but confirmed when we interviewed him for the second time, was that the Odessia platform, the new commuter train for Alstom, will be sort of run out of Derby for all their global bids and orders. So that's terrific. Yeah, it is terrific news. So well done them.
Yeah, no, that was very good news. And in other train building news, of course, we had a £500 million deal very recently for Hitachi from First Group and Angel Trains for 70 new 800 series trains for First's open access operations, which also included the 10-year maintenance contract. So that's a big deal for them as well.
It was great that, But without wishing to sound sort of negative,
I knew that you'd make this negative. I knew you would with this one.
Well, no. No, we said, didn't we, at the time?
We did.
I'm not going to make an open access point, I promise. It was great for Hitachi. It's great for everybody involved. You know, for Jim Bruin, who runs the UK business for rail, and all the team, because they work. You know, they're terrific people. They work, incredibly hard. The problem is 70 vehicles is kind of, you know, for a facility that size is not that much, and so we've got Hitachi at Newton Aycliffe, we've got Derby at Litchurch Lane, we've now got Siemens opened in Goole. I mean, bottom line, for the new rolling stock orders we are likely to see, and arguably that's, I mean, HS2's new vehicles are will have an impact on this, and a positive one. I think we've got too much capacity. So these challenges of feast and famine, unless there's a very clear strategy that comes out, probably as part of the spending review, because no one's going to commit to anything till then. I just think we're in this sort of cycle of boom and bust. But, you know,
that's
true. For now,
that's true. Although, just to challenge you slightly there, that is why the Odessia platform moving into Derby is so important, because actually that's not about the UK market, is it? That's about, you know, a worldwide market that's being held within the UK. And I think that gives us the opportunity to not just be serving the UK market with all these train builders. So maybe others will think about that too.
Oh, you've taken the happy pills today. That's great.
I have, yeah. It's a good day.
You're right. I mean,
it's a good day.
that will certainly help, and there's no doubt about that. I still think we've got too much capacity, but maybe not quite as too much as perhaps first thought.
We'll see. We'll see. In other good news, opening on the 15th of December was the Northumberland line, of course. 18-mile route from Newcastle to Ashington, cost £298.5 million. And it was a long time coming, wasn't it? So, and I think actually we found a reopening that you were in favour of, Mr. Battle.
Yeah, this is good. The Northumberland, as Nigel called it. Actually, I much prefer that name. I think that's brilliant.
I like it, yeah.
Yeah, it was good, that. Yeah, look, it's a good one. You know, it was one of those communities, a whole section of the country that with quite high density population who were really, you know, impacted negatively when their passenger services were withdrawn. This isn't sort of like some sleepy branch line somewhere. This was quite the opposite. So no, I think it was a great one. It's good.
Yeah, and I mean, they're predicting 380,000 passengers by 2034 or something like that, which is significant. So,
and they'll beat it, because they often do. The question does come, though, was it worth 300 million quid plus all the operating costs? I think in this case, yes, but that's why it's one where, you know, I'm supportive.
Well, we shall see. And then other good news, although I suspect you're about to make this one bad news as well, the strikes were resolved.
Well, were they? I mean, a pay deal got done.
Yeah.
And ASLEF, we were talking about drivers, said, right, you know, that's peace in our time. Doesn't feel that way for users of Great Western Railway, GWR at the weekend, or a Northern, or wherever. I know the government have been trumpeting the fact they've fixed, you know, LNER, and they've had zero cancellations due to driver shortage or whatever. But it doesn't feel to me like the problem has been resolved, such that, you know, passengers have noticed that it's been fixed. Do you know what I mean?
I suppose I see what you mean, yeah.
I think this is one we need to look at in some depth. It's on our list, isn't it, for 2025? It's not. It's there was a big political sort of flag waving, and then the problems still remain. So many of them still remain.
Yeah, no, I can see your point there. I'm trying
not to. I'm trying not to be too miserable.
I know. I was going to say, I've taken the happy pills, and I think you've woken up on the wrong side of the bed. But anyway,
Possibly.
I'm afraid we're probably about to make it worse with some bad news. But we'll see. So obviously, probably the worst news we had of 2024 was the tragic accident at Tallathig in Wales on October 21st, in which one passenger sadly died, 4 others were seriously injured, and a further 11 were taken to hospital. Of course, we don't yet have RABE's full report into the accident, which I guess we'll see sometime during the year. But their initial findings suggested that low levels of wheel rail adhesion were at play, and that the automatic sanding system on one of the trains was blocked. So I'm guessing we could see some recommendations about wheel rail adhesion and wheel slide protection, perhaps, in the coming year.
Yeah, possibly. No, it's a terrible thing. I mean, it does, though, also highlight just how generally safe rail travel is.
It does.
Not, making light of it. It was a terrible thing. And you can legitimately argue that one is one too many, but nonetheless, rail is still an incredibly safe means of travel. But we need to work out. We need to understand exactly what happened at that one. So,
yeah,
and you're quite right. There'll be some recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other really big one that, I think sadly has been mainly bad things, is HS2. And we've been on quite a roller coaster, really, haven't we, in 2024 with HS2. But just before Christmas, I think it was December the 17th, something like that, Heidi Alexander announced the first report to Parliament on HS2's progress since the general election. And I have to say, one thing that really worried me in that report was that it's littered with mentions of the importance of delivering HS2 for what's described as the lowest reasonable cost. And totally independently of those statements, it's then going on with the usual promises that HS2 is going to be transformational for the economy, society, levelling up, and. But it strikes me that decisions such as 6 platforms at Euston, for example, which we'll come on to, put some of those benefits at risk longer term. So while it might meet the short-term aim to spend as little as possible, are we longer term just making the project less beneficial by doing that? Full stop, discuss, as Nigel says.
Yeah, no, we could well be. I mean, it's 2 days after she published that report, we had the Public Accounts Committee, where the accounting officers, which is kind of government speak, got grilled by the committee over progress on, or depending on your point of view, not on HS2. And so there were 2 folks from the department and 2 from HS2 Limited. And I've watched it. I thought they did a pretty fair job at times of defending where we had got to. But you're right, the total focus for the first, it was 2.5 hours, the focus for most of what felt like the entire first half was cost. Just cost. Yes. And then somebody piped up and said, oh, we probably ought to talk about the benefits. And actually, I know this is going to sound really controversial, but as I listened, I was starting to think, do you know what? Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things whether it's 10 billion or 20 billion more than we first thought? Get the benefit streams happening as fast as you possibly can. Now, the whole point, what Mark Wilde, the new CEO of HS2 said, and he said, for him, the fundamental reason why it's gone wrong is because the designs and the consents were not mature enough before they started construction.
Yes.
Probably true. Well, if he says it and he's thought about it, then it almost certainly is true, right? But that was then. Well, we kind of are where we are now. And most of the civils, we're coming towards the end of the civils process. We're getting into systems now. And I think there's an argument to just get it built so that we can have the benefit stream. Because look, you look at Crossrail, who ever now talks about how much Crossrail cost or how much over it was, over the budget it was? No one, right? Absolutely nobody. It's been a blistering success.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's something true about that, about HS2, but it was the PAC. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive on that PAC hearing, because there was some actually quite not disturbing is the wrong word, bit depressing in terms of long-term projects and the long-term outlook for rail, and for lots of things actually, but we obviously only care about rail, by some of the things that were said around the system that we live in. So we'll come back to that.
Definitely,
but no,
something to come back to.
A mixed year for HS2.
And the other thing that I think we need to mention with that report on HS2 actually was that it did also make clear that the government doesn't intend to reinstate phase 2, but plans to set out its policy on strategic rail investments north of Birmingham in due course, as it says. But it's a bit worrying, because it also said that the government is developing a programme to dispose of land that is surplus to requirements and has completed a small number of pilot sales. And obviously we said fairly recently how important it was to protect that land if we're going to have any discussions about trying to find a north of Birmingham option, whatever that looks like, whatever it's called. So it's a bit worrying that they're saying, actually, we've started some pilot sales and we've got a plan to sell off some more.
Yeah, they talked about this in some depth at the PAC, and Alan Over actually made the point that there's different safeguarding arrangements on different bits of land. So phase 2, 2A to Crewe, safeguarding's been lifted, was lifted by the previous government, hasn't been reinstated. Phase 2B, of course, has now got wrapped up into the hybrid build process for Northern Powerhouse Rail. But that was one of the things that Bernadette Kelly said that I think should concern people, by the way, because she actually said, I've moved away from the language of NPR, and basically said, I'm paraphrasing now, right? But what I heard her say was, we're not really into these big projects anymore. We're going to do probably going to look at lots of smaller schemes, which was interesting. But then, surprisingly, and I hadn't clocked it, safeguarding is actually still in place on the eastern leg, which is, of course, the bit was canned first,
really?
because, at the request of local authorities for potential other schemes. And then there's other bit, in terms of land sales, there's bits where whatever happens, whatever you do with the strategic network north of Birmingham, these are bits of land that they won't need. And I think it's those that they've probably looked at the pilot schemes for sale. It's very complicated to sell land. There's all these, I think it's called, is it the Critchell Downs? There's these very complex rules which can take years and years and years. So they're saying whatever happens, it's not going to be a quick process. But no, I was a bit depressed by that same point. We do at least have certainty over Euston.
Yes.
Obviously, we know that the tunnels are going to go there, and that's going to be funded by the public sector. But Peter Hendy, I think in a written answer, said that it's going to be 6 platforms. And again, they talked about that at the PAC, and Alan Over at least said, but we know that it's possible we may need more depending on what happens in the future.
Yes.
North of Birmingham. So we're looking at making passive provision for 3, possibly 4 additional platforms to take it to 9 or 10. But that's not the same as a commitment, but at least
and I've got a question on that that's maybe a naive question, I don't know. But if you're going to make passive provision like that, and so it's different, so we're now talking about something that's different from the original scope for Euston. Is this going to now incur loads of cost to redesign it again to do 6 platforms with provision for potentially 3 or 4 more?
Well, quite possibly. They're now talking about a sort of a unified station, incorporating both the HS2 and the traditional station. I mean, if you want the really depressing news, rather than get HS2 to build Euston now, I mean, it was a political decision to take them off. It was almost like just a strop. by the previous government. I think we've kind of got over that. Yeah, you made your point. Now, I would now give HS2 Limited Euston back because it's a railway station. But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to create a new public company.
Which is going to cost more money.
Well, and it's going to be led by the Department of Transport, which is fairly terrifying in itself.
Isn't it?
And again, Alan Over talked about this at the PAC and said, we have to do this because it's very different, Euston, because it's the HS2 station, it's the traditional station, it's linking to the underground, and it's all this housing. But by the way, without going off on a tangent, there's another thing. He also said that Camden Council alone have estimated that the economic value of the new housing developments at Euston is worth something like £40 billion.
What?
It was just this kind of total disconnect between how much it's costing and the benefits. You're just like, if that's true, just get on with it anyway.
Which I suppose was my point at the beginning of this rant that we've just had about HS2. Really, was that I think we've got so absorbed in this. It's costing too much. We need to spend less money, and we've forgotten what it was for in the first place. And
I think that's
I think that's a dangerous place to be.
I completely agree with that. Even the chair of the PAC said maybe this project was missold at the beginning. Rather than call it a project about speed, it should have been a project about capacity. And I found myself screaming at the TV going, it's certainly in my mind, it always was about capacity. It's just that those people sat opposite you. I mean, not those people, obviously, but the department,
their predecessors,
allowed it to be misexplained, right? It always was about capacity. There was one extraordinary point, and we'll move on from HS2 because we're going to do, I suspect, a lot more on HS2 in the coming weeks. The bat shed, the £100 million bat shed, reared its head again with this most extraordinary exchange and question. In fact, rather than me explain it, just have a listen to this.
Can we switch for a second to Luke Charteris and the vexed subject of a bat tunnel?
Thank you, and good morning. My question's addressed to you, Mr. Weil, and of course we've had the infamous £100 million bat shed receiving a lot of media attention. Natural England did not require HS2 to build the tunnel, and it left it to you to decide. Spending £100 million on a bat cave is a shocking waste of taxpayer money. So will you apologise, or do you at least have some regrets about this?
I might invite Mr. Foster to talk in detail about the actual engineering and the consenting process, which I think is worth...
Can we keep this sort of fairly tight, because we've got so much to cover?
But what I would say is I understand why that would raise public concern. It seems an extraordinary amount of money. But I would say this. I've actually visited this structure myself in my first week to see it. It's of great concern to me to understand. This is a considerable engineering structure. It's in a railway that will travel at over 200 miles an hour. So the engineering of this whole system is quite considerable. Also, at the end of the day, HS2 must obviously comply with the law. And the law says that we must mitigate damage, harm to protected species. It's our job to mitigate it. You're quite right. Natural England don't tell us what to do. It's our job to mitigate it. I think there was up to 15 different options to do this. One of them was even tunnelling underneath it. We simply have to comply with the law. The mitigation that's been arrived at by our contractors and experts in this field is the most appropriate in terms of the context of the railway.
So if I'm correct, Mr. Wilde, if I may, you have no regrets about the £100 million plus expenditure?
I understand and I can sympathise with from the outside why this seems an extraordinary amount of money. I've looked at this extensively. I've visited the site myself. At the end of the day, HS2 Limited must comply with the law. The law says we must mitigate. We simply must do that in the law. Then we need to gain planning permission to get it. I think for legislative purposes, for parliamentarians, there's probably a lot to unpack about this. HS2 needs to get 8,500 consents. This is a complex one. So I can't apologise for complying with the law.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, quite incredible. I mean, it's actually an extraordinary question,
It
but I
was
thought he answered
really.
that very well by saying,
He did.
I'm not apologising for complying with the law.
Yeah.
And that's the point, really. I know we talked about this on a previous show, and we did give the chair of HS2 a hard time, not for the point about don't blame HS2 for merely complying with the law. It was kind of the
but he
way
deserved
did
it for getting all his facts wrong.
Yeah, but the big point, the real point, and I suspect the point he was trying to make was doing these mega projects is like trying to run a sprint with both legs tied together and your arms.
Yes.
It's really hard. And actually, I think this is the biggest issue of all. The system is broken. The machine that allows these things to happen is defective. I'm not just talking about railways, I'm talking about everything. And the government's talked about, getting rid of the red tape and changing things. Great.
Yes.
But that's where they should be focusing their effort, not challenging HS2 Limited on their cost methodology. I mean, that was just extraordinary in the PAC. Don't worry about that. HS2 are either right or wrong. It doesn't really matter. What you need to do, government, is focus on fixing that broken system. And the bat sheds are a great example of it, really.
Yeah. No, I agree with all that. Should we move on from HS2 then?
I think we probably should, actually.
Not for anything more positive, I'm afraid, but cancellations. So this has been an absolute nightmare for passengers in the last year. Just a few days ago, the latest figures showed that the number of cancellations is at a record high, reaching 4% in the 12 months to November 9th, which is double the rate that it was in 2025. More than 400,000 services were either part or fully cancelled in that year, and 360,000 of those were cancelled on the day, and the rest of them were P-coded, so cancelled by 10 p.m. the previous evening.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just astonishing, really.
Yeah, it is not acceptable.
No.
Now, it's easy to say that. It's quite hard to fix it because a lot of it relates to legacy stuff around train crew and but I also sort of sense there's people have kind of given up a bit. I don't know, not given up, just like,
I know what you mean,
whatever,
though.
There is that sense, isn't it? I mean, one of the things we will be talking about is what's going on the West Coast Main Line north of Preston, because where Avanti West Coast do seem to just give up running trains, north of Preston for operational reasons, and need to understand that better, because it's I've always had this view, Steph, that fundamentally pretty much everybody who works in the front line, and I'm talking about the front line now, including managers who do all the rostering, the train crew management, whatever, actually want to run a really good, safe, reliable railway service. I don't think anybody turns up for work going, I'm just going to be a bit crap today. I don't believe that. Right? But something is preventing that from happening, and I'm not entirely certain what it is. Got my suspicions, but we'll be looking at that in some detail. But cancellations at that percentage, wholly unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, it's no surprise that Northern was the one with the most cancellations at 8% of services, and then Avanti followed very closely behind on 7.8%. So, there's definitely some things we need to look into more there, I think.
Absolutely.
And then the last one of our bad news was one I know has driven you up the wall a bit, really, Richard, which is dithering over GBR, which we've talked a bit about already, really. But,
Just create a shadow organisation, right? You don't need legislation to do that. Clearly don't need legislation to do that. Now, they say they've done it and they've appointed a chair, but I think she's only doing one. I think Peter Hendy in his Transport Select Committee performance in December said she's doing 1 to 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, terrific. So where's the acting CEO? Where's the CEO of Jeep? Just give somebody the job, right?
Yeah.
The obvious person is Alex Hines. Fine. Give him the job, right? Say, you are now the CEO of Shadow GBR. you watch things will start to change if you do that. So that's the dithering bit. Yeah. So it's not been a great year, has it, really?
It's not really, is it? Yeah, it's not really. But we've had a pretty good year at Green Signals, haven't we? We've
had a fantastic year.
I think we've done pretty well. We closed the year on over 9,360 subscribers on YouTube, which is amazing. We didn't quite hit 10K, which I think we would have liked, but we came close. And to do that in a year anyway is pretty impressive.
It's great.
And we've got around 2,500 on audio, so we're getting around 12,000 in total, which is impressive. Better than the crowd at a home game for Blackburn Rovers, maybe?
That's outrageous. I think we had about 25,000 for the Boxing Day visit at Sunderland.
I don't believe that.
No, I think about 7,000 of that were Sunderland fans, actually. They've got the biggest away support.
Oh, well, there you go, then.
In the league. Anyway, it's been a terrific year. We've had a video, I think, go over 50,000 views, which was our...
We have LSL.
When we... LSL, Locomotive Services Limited. Yeah. So that was terrific. So it's been great. What's been your highlight of the Green Signals year, Steph?
Yeah, do you know, I was thinking about this, and I think I have two. Right. One is LSL. Going there was just amazing. It was like getting into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It was just incredible. And the other one is one that we've not published yet, which is our visit to Bala, which will come out soon. And I think, again, that was just, as jollies go, that was pretty special for me.
It was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the process of editing it. It's quite a complicated edit, as you know, because we also had sort of drone footage. And
we did. We had so many different cameras and things going on, didn't we? But So come on, what was your highlight?
I think it'll be good. I think some of the interviews we did as well were terrific, because you can get into a bit more in depth with that. I think we had, obviously we've mentioned Nick Crossfield. I loved my chat with Andy Byford.
Oh, that was fantastic.
For such a long time. Yeah, no, that was great. I thought Tim Shoveler was great. We talk about people who are great railway leaders. Different figures like David Higgins was terrific. I thought Hugh Merriman was really game to do that. He's done what Labour's not done yet.
Yes,
which is,
he has.
So he was good, and I enjoyed Mick Whelan. I mean, can you imagine Hugh Merriman and Mick Whelan? Couldn't imagine two more different people in a way, but both great and both game for it. And so I must admit I enjoy the interviews.
I think you're right. And actually, I think out of all of those, I think Andy Byford's was really inspirational for me. I really did enjoy that one. But I think listening to Sir David Higgins, because I came with you when we did that interview to help film it, and it was just so amazing listening to him. He's just like this font of knowledge, and you just want to ask him all these questions and see what he would do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, he was great.
Yeah.
We've had loads of things, recurring themes that, the gifts that keep giving, as you might call it. HS2 we've talked about, and that'll be a thread. West Coast Railways and central door locking at the other end of the scale, really.
We still get people asking us when we're going to find out more about that, don't we?
I know. And we kind of go, when we don't know. Find it remarkable, really. It has been a good year for Green Signals, and we probably ought to talk about what we got planned for.
Well, yeah. So what have we got coming up in 2025, really? So we've got a few features that we're working on short term, haven't we? So we've already mentioned HS2 at the PAC. That we want to look into performance and cancellations, because lots of people are getting in touch with us about that, aren't they, and asking us to get into that one. So what's next on your list then, Richard, for big, investigations?
Well, we're developing a sort of a script for or a show plan for Roscoe's. We're going to look at those, and that's going to be fairly early. Again, that's probably possibly the most requested thing, actually. What's going on with Roscoe's. We're going to be looking at ridership and revenue in the light of the latest numbers from ORR, but there's actually some analysis from GB Rail Transition Team. It's really good, actually.
I was going to say, you were impressed with that, weren't you?
Yeah, and it's always been good. It is actually very, very good. So whichever team in GBR transition team does that, you do a great job, actually. So we're going to be looking at that. It's really interesting, okay? Because there's some evidence, actually, that the revenue is strengthening. So that's
yes,
quite
I
good.
saw that.
Yeah. We're going to look at that West Coast issue north of Preston, because I think there's a wider, although that might feel a little bit niche, there's actually a wider industry issue, I think, there.
Yes,
and
it's an example of something going on, isn't it?
Yeah, there's industrial relations, train crew, planning, culture, diversionary routes. There's all sorts of stuff that's linked to that. And then we'll look at I'd like to look at the East Coast timetable, because that actually got announced after the last show we did, that they've come up with a timetable, an industry-wide timetable for December 2025. So it'd be interesting to have a look at that, winners, losers, and see whether beneath the hype there's anything to be concerned about, or whether it is actually genuinely great. I don't know. So we'll look at that. So lots of stuff to look at.
Yeah. And we'd really like to know what you'd like to see us feature, really. So if you've got any ideas or anybody think we should interview, then drop us a line and let us know, and we'll see what we can do. Now, we couldn't start a look forward to 2025 without first mentioning something that happened on New Year's Day. There was a global whistle-up that signalled the start of the railway's 200th anniversary year. More than 50 railways and around 200 locomotives joined in to sound off with whistles and horns to start the year-long celebration at midday on January 1st. Even overseas railways and model railway manufacturer Hornby got involved with engines on layouts tooting away. So, Richard, you thought you'd go along to a railway to see if you could hear some of these whistles for yourself, didn't you? So, shall we find out about that?
Indeed. Let's play the tape. Well, I'm here at the Avon Valley Railway near Bristol, the former Midland Railway line between Mangotsfield and Bath Green Park, here for the Rail 200 whistle-up. But before the actual whistle-up itself, I had the chance to talk to Mark Simmons, General Manager here at the Avon Valley Railway, to find out a little bit how things are going and what they've got planned for this year. So I'm here with Mark Simmons, General Manager of the Avon Valley Railway. I suppose first question is, how's it going here? I mean, this is how long has the Avon Valley Railway been going as an operation, and how's the last 12 months been?
So for us, the last 12 months, actually, we've been celebrating our 50th anniversary.
Wow.
So the volunteers first came here in 1974, and then since then we've reinstated about 3 miles worth of track. The year itself was really good. Our main celebration for that was in Easter last year, or last year as it is now, and that was a great weekend, really sort of celebrating all the efforts that the volunteers have put in over those last 50 years. Since then, it's probably been, like most railways, a sort of fairly average year. Santa that we've just had was, as always, very good, but our sort of ordinary operating days have been a bit more challenging at times, but I think that's reflected in sort of the market generally.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. But it's a very important other celebration this year, of course. You've had your 50th anniversary.
Indeed.
2025 is the 200th anniversary of the railway, with the Stockton Dart in 1825. And we're here today on New Year's Day because there's going to be a whistle-up.
Indeed.
Why did you choose to get involved with that?
Well, I think for us, it's part of a sort of a national sort of promotion of railways, as you say. It is 200 years, and that is sort of for me and for all of us a sort of a once in a lifetime sort of round number to get involved with. Nice to be part of that, to celebrate what railways brought to this country and just the significant change that they brought when they came along. So today we're going to have a whistle up, and so for us the locomotive that's running our passenger service will be whistling, along with some other engines that we've got in the yard, and it's quite nice to have that sense of at 12 o'clock us and most of the other heritage railways around the country that are running today will also be doing that same thing. So that sort of camaraderie of knowing that in other parts of the country we're also being part of sort of a bigger thing that's happening today.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, listen, I'm very much looking forward to it. The weather hasn't been entirely kind to us, but then typical British New Year's Day.
Indeed, yeah,
but
absolutely.
looking forward to the whistle up. And listen, for the rest of the year, I know you're thinking of other things that you can do as well. But
we are indeed, yes. Yeah. I mean, for us, there's always that sort of thing of what other events can we do that can sort of form part of and make people remember the Railway 200 series of things that's happening this year.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Mark, and looking forward to the whistle up.
We'll see you in a moment. Thank you.
And then it was time for the whistle up itself, which, since it lasted more than 3 minutes, we've edited a little bit. Happy New Year from the Avon Valley Railway, and here's to Railway 200 in 2025.
So as we've already discussed, it looks like HS2 is going to continue to be a big story in 2025. But what else have we got to look forward to, do you think then, Richard? So where would you like to start?
Well, clearly rail reform, the railways bill, is going to be big. I do find it quite funny when politicians talk about reform, because the definition of reform is a change in something in order to improve it. And I often feel like they get the first bit of that every time, change. But whether it improves anything is a totally different matter. But it's going to be a huge feature. Yep. I mean, everybody will be talking about what's in the bill, what's not in the bill, how it's going to be implemented, and so on and so forth. That'll be big.
Although we probably still won't see it in 2025 anyway, will we? So,
well, as they've said, it could be 2026.
Exactly.
It could be 2 years, but I think the bill will hopefully be there. Spending review is going to be huge.
Yes.
Hugely important for everybody. I mean, not just for railways.
Yeah, of course.
In the spring, that'll be massive. I've got a horrible suspicion that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is going to have a lot less manoeuvring room than she thought, and I think the impact on the rail sector could actually be quite gloomy. That's my instinct. I want to be proved wrong, but I'm nervous about that. So for me, those are the two really big things, which are quite external, obviously. The railway can't do an awful lot about those. They will be sort of done to it.
Yeah.
As far as the railway is concerned, I think performance is going to carry on being a story, because I guess,
well, it's not going to be resolved overnight, is it?
No. And franchises coming, franchises, not franchises, haven't been for yonks, have they? Rail operations coming back into public ownership, we know has diddly squat to do with improving performance. That's done by people on the ground. So I think performance and cancellations in industrial relations is just going to carry on rumbling away. The one thing's for certain, Steph, is that we are going to have stacks of things to talk about and plenty of content for green signals.
Not least because it is, of course, Railway 200 year, which means that there's going to be all sorts of stuff going on. The Greatest Gathering, for example, which is very exciting. There's loads of stuff potentially to go and have as a jolly,
Absolutely.
Richard.
Oh, lots of jolly opportunities. No, you're right. That's a really positive thing. And in fairness to the industry, there is some interesting stuff going to happen, and there's Exhibition Train, I think, and there's the Greatest Gathering. There's loads of stuff going on now. It's as if suddenly we've woken up to this thing, and I think it's going to be terrific. Yeah,
no, I'm really quite excited to see what all the little railways do as well, because obviously they're all doing their own things, aren't they? So there could be some interesting little nuggets happening. Anyway, now it's time to thank everyone who has left us a super thanks on YouTube this week. And you are Callum Thornelow, Nigel Mapston, Paul Roberts, Jim Maggs, Robert Walsh, Alan Kirkman, Tom Wood, Robert Allison, and Chris Exley. We appreciate so much that you leave us these super thanks, so thank you ever so much for doing it. It really means the world to us.
It does. And thanks for everybody who's become a member of Green Signals in the last year, where it's really great to have so many people in the communities on YouTube, and there's a different one on Patreon. And we love interacting.
We do.
I've actually spent a lot of happy hours over the Christmas break sort of commenting back on YouTube and Patreon to people who left comments. So thanks for that. If you are a gold or silver member, do drop us an email with your address to info@greensignals.org if you haven't already. I mean, the majority have now. I know, thank you. That enabled me to get 60 members mugs out before Christmas. And there's more about to go out as well, including some mugs to quiz winners. And we thank every member in the end credits of the show, gold, silver, and bronze. So that's all terrific. If you are a gold member, part of your membership package was you got a personal video for a question of your choice. So emails will be coming out very soon, I think, on that, Steph.
They might already have gone by the time people are listening to this, but yeah.
Oh, they've gone. Oh, wow.
Well,
okay,
they might have
fantastic.
done by the time people listen. We'll see.
Fair enough.
But yeah.
No, I'm looking forward to doing those, so that'd be great.
Yeah, very exciting. Right, now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. So this first one was sent to us by David Redgewell. On December the 13th, the Gateshead Highway flyover was closed to all traffic because engineers raised concerns over the stability of the structure. The flyover not only takes the A167 over it, but Tyne and Wear metro services run in tunnels underneath the flyover. So metro services have had to be suspended between Monument and Heworth over fears that the tunnels could cave in if the viaduct were to collapse, which is a bit scary, really. The flyover was built in the late 1960s, and water has been getting into the concrete structure, which is causing it to deteriorate, which I don't think is terribly unusual, but it has started to cause crumbling concrete inside one of the pillars. And so engineers have said, it's urgent safety risk, and we've got to do something about it. So work began on December the 27th to place temporary props around the pillar, which is directly over the tunnel where the metro runs, to provide additional support for the structure, in the hope that metro services will be able to recommence while a longer-term plan is put in place. But it's a huge amount of disruption in that area right on top of Christmas.
Here's an interesting one. So Avanti West Coast Class 221 Super Voyager fleet has now officially bowed out of service with those new Evero, the Hitachi trains, taking over. The Voyagers have been in service on the West Coast main line for 22 years. Can you believe that? That does make me feel slightly old.
I was going to say, does this story make you feel really old?
It does a bit. It does a bit. I mean, introduced in 2002, they ran over 109 million miles in total. Which
that's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of them going to cross country, so obviously they'll continue. But a bit of a sort of a moment in time, isn't it?
Yeah.
No more Super Voyagers on the West Coast mainland.
No, exactly. Right, a little bit of Flying Scotsman news now. The National Railway Museum has signed the agreement with the locomotive's new custodian, North Steam Operations Limited, which I can't remember even when we talked about this, but it was quite a while ago, wasn't it, Richard?
It's months and months.
It's been a long time, and people have been asking about this. So this agreement covers future arrangements for the locomotive and how the two parties will work together. Since the intention to work together was announced, Ensol has spent the past few months contracting operating and promoter teams, which is presumably why it's taken a while to get to this point. They've apparently held productive conversations with various heritage railways, and Scotsman is likely to be back in steam as early as February, which is quite exciting. Further announcements will be made once details of its schedule have been finalised.
And from the world's most famous steam locomotive to something thoroughly modern, a good bit of HS2 news to end on.
Nice little segue there.
Did you like that? That's quite good. So tunnel boring machine Shishilla has completed its 5-mile drive under the capital, reaching the Green Park Way vent shaft in Ealing. And it did that on December the 19th. The 8.4 mile, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Twin board Northolt Tunnel will take HS2 trains from West Ruislip to Old Oak Common. 4 TBMs are being used to dig the tunnel, with Shishilla being the first to reach the destination. And they're incredible things, these TBMs. They're like underground. They're actually like underground factories.
I know, they're amazing, aren't they?
Drill.
Yeah.
Yeah. They kind of obviously dig it out and then they line it with precast segments and everything, grout them in and then move on. It's quite extraordinary. So, an amazing bit of kit.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, then you can send them to news@greensignals.org, and any that we read out will give you a name check.
We will indeed, which means it's time to do the quiz.
See, I really feel like I should have teed up some kind of, sarky comment or something for this point, but Nigel's kind of given up on it now, hasn't he? He just sort of gives you a funny look these days.
Gives me a funny look, which doesn't really work on radio, does it? Never mind. Anyway, now the last time out, when we did the last show, when I was in Abu Dhabi, we didn't have a quiz question. So there's no winner to announce this week. So we'll go straight on to the question, which comes from a regular listener, Richard Rosen. And it's a really pertinent one because this is the year that obviously all that train operations start to come back into the public sector. So this is a great question. Thank you, Richard. And it's this. Since privatisation in sort of 1996, let's say that, on which bit of the rail network has the local franchised operator had the most number of different brand names? Now, we think there are 2 sections because they've got the same number. So there's 2 possible answers, we think.
I like this question. That's good.
It's a great question. So, which bit of the network has had the most different brand names? If you think you know, answers please to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, January the 4th, after which we'll put all the correct answers in a hat, select a winner at random to receive one of our very special Green Signals quiz winners mugs.
Mm-hmm. We'll see how many people get get Richard's question then.
I was going to say, yes,
it's still the same name, isn't it? Still the same name.
It's true.
Anyway, here's a funny story to end on that was sent in to us by Peter Mugridge. He spotted on a forum that someone had posted about an announcement on their train saying that a platform was closed at East Croydon due to someone dropping a load of chocolate. Sadly, we don't have any more information about where this chocolate came from or indeed what kind of chocolate it was, which I think is quite important. But some of the one-liners that followed this post were priceless. If it causes delays, then presumably people will end up being choco late. You weren't impressed by that one. I'm sad. Is it the platform leading to the former milk dock, which has now been plain lined? Perhaps someone should have told them the British rail network isn't suitable for double-deckers.
No, that's quite good.
See, that was good. That was good. Did some bounty hunters turn up hoping to be paid for cleaning up the mess? I like that. And I rather like this one. All this speculative whisper, but at least we're keeping on topic.
Very good.
Very funny.
I mean, some of those were pretty ropey, weren't they? But no.
Yeah, but it was great. There was just this whole list of people having a go to see whether they could get the funniest one. I thought it was good. So thank you, Peter. That gave us a good giggle.
It did.
And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. So thank you ever so much for joining us. And please do give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment. And if you're on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel because it really does help. And if you really want to support us, do find out about membership on YouTube and Patreon because we give you lots of great goodies and it's really worth it. And other than that, please join us again next week. And it's goodbye from me. And
it's goodbye from me.